Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to She Is Still Dope TV. This is our August edition of the coaching seminar for She Is Still Dope Network. And I am so excited today. I'm your host, The Real Prate, and we are here to welcome a woman of God who is going to give us a wonderful message today and impart some wisdom on us in a very needed topic that is going to affect everyone that watches. So please share this broadcast, share this seminar with your friends and your family who may need a word today on the topic of conflict resolution. So just to jump in, I'm going to give you just a bit of a background on our special guest coach. Our guest coach this month is Dr. Danielle Hairston-Green. She holds a PhD in educational leadership from Prairie View A&M University, a master's degree in community psychology and social change, and a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Penn State University. Her dissertation, Perceptions of Agricultural Leaders and the Value of Non-Cognitive Skills Related to Early Success in the Agricultural Industry, from 2015. Dr. Hairston-Green's action research includes perceptions of mentors and mentoring relationships among minority doctoral students, examining microaggression at a historically Black university, and the impact of food insecurity and homelessness among college students at an HBCU. Her most recent co-authored published work is Cultured Pearls, an investigation of culturally responsive pedagogical practices used by white teachers in urban settings. Currently, she is the Institute Director for Human Development and Relationships with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. She is the founder of Embracing Arms, Inc., which is a nonprofit organization with a vision to engage students and empower parents to take charge of their health, education, and safety within the community in which they live. She has served as an adolescent health educator and prevention specialist for 15 years at various nonprofit organizations and successfully implemented 2 leadership development training initiatives for teens. Dr. Hairston-Green is sought after to speak and facilitate workshops on state, local, national, and international platforms, educating attendees on youth advocacy, parent empowerment, cultural diversity, change and conflict management, leadership development, and the power of storytelling. She has also designed CSE, the conceptual framework that looks at soft skill development among college graduates. She is the mother of 3 adult children and 4 grandchildren. Please help me welcome Dr. Danielle Hairston-Green.
Hey, everyone. Thank you. I love the intro. It's funny because we always send the introduction to the host and then we act like we never heard it before. Like, oh my God, that's me. So it's always good to hear it all. It's a reminder of what you're doing and a reminder of what you still need to do.
It's always refreshing when you hear it come out of someone else's mouth because it gives you, like you said, the reminder of the work that you're doing and how impactful it is and how important it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So today is a special day for us here at She Is Still Dope. This topic is very much needed in today's society, especially for the women of the organization and who participate in the platform, because as we were talking about before we got started, there's so many conflicts that may not have be recognized or have risen to the surface. And then when you add those to the conflicts that we deal with every day, the ability to cope and to effectively manage that is super important. So I just want to thank you for coming on today and welcome you to the platform and allow you to share your wisdom with the viewers. And again, I'm going to ask as we're getting started here that if you have anyone, the viewers, please share, like, and send this broadcast out to your friends and family who may be able to benefit from this knowledge that Dr. Hairston-Green is going to be dropping on us today. I'm going to let you go ahead and dive in to your topic, and then we will go ahead and share your presentation with the group. So go ahead and get started, Dr. Hairston. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And I can go ahead and share the screen right now.
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. Let's see where we are. Oh, this is way easier than I thought. Okay.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to go ahead and add it there, and you are good to go.
Wonderful.
All right. So as you progress through the slides, you are in control. I'm going to drop out, and I will be here if you need me. But thank you so much. And again, please share. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All righty. Well, thank you again for having me. This is always exciting to come in front of new audiences, especially individuals who span the globe. And so from what I understand about She Is Still Dope is that you guys are from everywhere, not just in our local areas or in our state or within the borders. And so this is amazing because we get to tap into the minds and the spirits of those who I would otherwise never meet. So if you can, in the chat box, let us know where you're coming from so I can get a good idea where, what state you're representing, what country you're representing. And I'll quickly just kind of talk a little bit about my journey to, as you're doing that, my journey to understanding and finding the importance of talking about conflict management. And so I am a teen mom. I carry that with me, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life because it's part of my journey. And being a teen mom was very difficult. And so I had a lot of experiences, hey, Florida, a lot of experiences that I wouldn't wish upon anyone, right? You make choices, things happen. And so my choice, granted me the blessing of caring for a child at a very young age. I was 18 when I had my first child and, was in college with a newborn child. And by the time I was 26, I had 3 children. And so I was overwhelmed, right? Dealing with conflict all the time, not really knowing how to deal with it because I was so young when I thrust myself into this adult world. And so I will say that it's been an amazing journey of self-discovery from the age of 17 when I found out I was going to be a mother to today as a grandmother of 4. One of the things that I learned in my journey is that there are some critical skills that young people are not getting that would help them be successful in their careers. As they're planning for their careers, as they're planning for next steps in their lives, post high school, post secondary education, whatever that journey kind of would lead you. Some of our young people really struggle with certain soft skills. And so it got me really excited because I wanted to do some work in the community to help our young people tap into those skills. And so we developed a couple leadership institutes when I was back home in Pennsylvania. Of course, I live in Wisconsin now, but when I was back home in Pennsylvania, I started some leadership programs that would help our young people develop the skills that they need so they can be successful. And with that came training peer educators to be, primary facilitators, training them on topics that will help prevent them from engaging in risky behaviors, engaging them in conversations about their own self-development and their own mental health. And some of the skills that we found were lacking were things like critical thinking, right? We call them those non-cognitive skills or those soft skills, but what I refer to them as those human skills, because there's nothing soft about really trying to tap into those critical thinking skills. That's a deep dive. It's very complex. And, critical thinking has several different definitions, right? But what we know about critical thinking is that it's about rational and skeptical, unbiased analysis or or the evaluation of factual evidence, right? Our young people don't get a lot of opportunities when they're in K through 12 to really deep dive in that skill. And then the other one, of course, is the conflict management piece. And again, our young people don't really get a lot of opportunities to deep dive. So as I'm progressing in my career, one of the things I wanted to explore was these two issues. You know, number one, what are those soft skills that our young people are missing? And number two, how can we better prepare them so that they can realize some early career success? So I will share, I have my slide up. Hopefully you guys can see it. Wonderful. And I'm using this really interesting platform. So you may start to see one or two slides at the same time. This is me trying to be savvy, and it oftentimes doesn't work the way I want to. And so this is the conceptual framework that was referenced earlier. It's called C5E, and it looked at the soft skills that young people need in order for them to realize early career success. And so what I did was I spoke to different industry leaders all over the country, specifically on agriculture, because I don't know if you know, but agriculture is the largest and the fastest growing industry in the entire world, not just in this city, not just in this state, not just in our country, everywhere is the largest and the fastest growing industry. We have land-grant institutions, and in another session that I'll come before you all can talk a little bit more about land-grant institutions and its significance. But the designation as a land-grant institution basically allowed for higher education institutions to train and educate young people in the area of agriculture, mechanics, and agriculture, mechanics, and military tactics. So those were the three areas that was focused in these institutions. And about 20 of these institutions are HBCUs. And so we were seeing young people graduating every day, coming out of these institutions, you know, studying agriculture, but we weren't seeing them represented in leadership. We weren't seeing them represented in the high level in the U.S. government. We wasn't seeing them represented in the different sectors of the agriculture industry. And we didn't understand why. We're educating them, we're preparing them, we're providing them with internships, but they were not realizing that early career success that we hoped that they would. And so I had conversations with leaders all over the country, talked to them about what do they believe was missing. And so as we're filtering through all of these skills, these are the ones that came up. They were missing the skill of collaboration, how to work with other people. I don't know about you, but when I was in graduate school, the very first thing that I hope did not happen is that I was put on a team to work with someone. I'm like, please don't put me on a team. I don't want to do teamwork. I'm good. You know, I can do this by myself. And so a lot of young people never really learn how to work effectively as a team. Now, if you were in sports and things like that, you may have been able to tap into those skills. But for the most part, the industry leaders is like, they're lacking those skills. Communication was another one, both written and oral communication. A lot of our young people were really struggling with that, you know, and doing public speaking and, you know, talking to people in large audiences is not an easy thing. In fact, when there was a study done probably about 10 years that asked people across the country, what were some of their greatest fears? Public speaking was number one above dying. Right. So communicating and speaking in front of large bodies of individuals is not easy, which is why I say we are not going to call these soft skills anymore. We're going to call them human skills, because there's nothing soft about learning how to speak in public and engaging people. The other one, of course, was creativity. Knowing how to take your creative juices and bring it to the table, fill up the space and let people know that you have value. A lot of our young people, you know, mute their own talent because they feel like they're an imposter. They come into these spaces and they feel like they're a bit of an imposter. So then they don't share their creativity. They hold it to themselves. And then the final one was ethics. We found that a lot of our young people, when they were put out into these opportunities to work in these amazing industries, they really didn't understand the rules. We had one situation where a young person was doing an internship, received a corporate credit card, and took the credit card and was just turning up with their friends, right? And then was like, hey, I'm at my limit. I need some more money, right? And so really trying to get young people to understand how important it is to understand ethics, ethical behavior. And then the last two were both conflict management and critical thinking. I know that all of you who have posted in the chat where you're from, you have, in the place that you are in, most likely have experienced some conflict in your life. Whether it was with a loved one, with someone that you work with someone that you were the subordinate of, someone in your church, someone in your community, even your children, right? We have experienced some level of conflict in our lifetime, whether we want to own it or not, right? But we have young people who are trying to go out into this industry, their chosen industry, who haven't really tapped into how to deal with conflict properly. Because oftentimes the first thing they're thinking when they're engaging conflict is, I don't want to deal with this. I don't care about that person anyway. They don't do anything for me. So I don't care. They don't pay my bills. I don't have to resolve this issue. I'm going to just delete them, take them out my phone, block them on Facebook, because that's a new thing now, right? You block them on Facebook. And so really trying to help our young people develop those conflict management skills is critical. And then critical thinking, really trying to look at ways to help young people tap into that frontal lobe, right? That good decision making, where the good decision making, it happens, right? We know that young people, it takes a while for that thing to develop, but it is about thinking rationally. It is about using your skepticism to help you filter through issues. It is about being unbiased in your analysis of situations, and your ability to evaluate what's fact versus what's fiction. And so what I discovered is that you can't really be effective in conflict management if you don't have good critical thinking skills. So those were some of those week 6 of our human skills, we'll call them, that we felt was necessary in order for young people to be able to thrive post their post-secondary experience or technical school experience, or even post-high school, because everyone doesn't want to go to college, right? So if they decide they want to be an entrepreneur, these are some of the things that they would need in order for them to be successful. So what we found was that, okay, it's not just with the agriculture industry. These are skills that are lacking across all of the industry amongst our young people. And how can we do better at preparing them? And so in my conceptual framework, I use the platform of a theory called the theory of reasoned action. And this theory of reasoned action really looks at how people and what motivates people to make changes in their lives. And this was about part of a health belief model. So this theory came about way back in the 60s. And probably about 10 years later, they add a different element that really talked about problem behaviors and resolving conflict, right? And so basically the theory, the foundation of this conceptual framework says that in order for us to be able to successfully support young people in developing these skills, they have to believe that the skill is necessary for them to be successful in the thing that they want to do. If they don't have the belief that that is a necessary skill for them to develop, we may not be able to tap into that and help them develop that skill. And this is not just for young people, this is for adults, but I'm giving it to you from a perspective of the study that I conducted. The other thing is, if there's no access to this information, access to training and professional development opportunities for them to develop those skills. If these skills aren't being provided to them while they're in high school or when they get to college, how is that implemented in some of the programming and some of the student organizations that are available to them? How can they tap into those skills? So if the information isn't accessible, there's no way for them to be able to even develop. And so here's what was interesting is when I was talking to the industry leaders, I would ask them, well, who do you think is responsible for making sure that these young people show up to your industry ready to go with all of these skills? And so the industry leaders are saying, hey, we don't have time and we don't have the money to invest in helping develop these young people and create all of this opportunity for them to tap into these skills. We need them to come in at the table ready to go, right? We don't want to spend all that money. We're gonna teach them what they need to know about our industry, but we don't have the time, or we're not going to invest the money in helping them to develop those skills. So we believe that the colleges are responsible for making sure that these young people are ready to go with these skills intact. And so when I talk to, college officials and university officials, I ask them the same question. Who do you think is responsible for making sure that these young people are ready to go when they go into the industry? And the officials say, well, we think it's the high school. The high school should put things in place to prepare them so that when they come to school, they're ready to go and they're successful. And so when I talk to the people in the high schools, they say, wait, that's not our problem. Their parents need to be teaching them these skills, in order for them to be successful. And of course, when you talk to the parents, it goes right back around to the high school. So no one's really taken ownership of who is responsible for making sure that these opportunities are available and that the young people have these skills sharpened before they move on to the next level of their academic trajectory. And so if they do not have the desire to do it, so that's the other piece. If they do not have the desire to do it, because it was never tapped into, all around, it was, yes, passing the buck, right? It was never tapped into. So they start thinking about, all of the times that they've been in high school and middle school and at home and college, and no one really made a big deal out of it. So I don't really have a desire to do that. I don't have time. I got to study for this stuff here. I got this textbook assignment. I got to work. I'm doing my little TikTok. I don't have time to do this. I don't even know if it's a big deal. And so the other piece is that if the person or the entity who is telling them this is absolutely necessary for you to be successful, if they do not have respect for that individual, if they don't have respect for the individual and see them in a position of authority, and that this individual is actually displaying some of this talent here, they're actually displaying what it's like to work collaboratively. They're actually displaying what it's like to manage conflict and critical thinking and all of those things. If they don't have respect for those who are saying to them, you must have these skills, there's a likelihood that they may not tap into it. So with these soft skills, plus tapping into what's called the theory of reason action, the belief, the accessibility, the desire, and the respect, that we believe equals early career success. So for today, we're going to talk about the critical thinking part and the conflict management part. So you guys with me? You ready to go? All right. So let's move to the next slide. So critical thinking, we talked a little bit about that. As I explained a little bit about the research, right? And so what we do know is that it is the analysis of facts to form a judgment, right? There are so many definitions out there for you, right? It's very complex. It's a very, very complex skill to develop, but and it has multiple definitions, as I mentioned before. But the definition usually include rational thinking. It usually includes being skeptical and using your skepticism to help you filter through what's fact and what's fiction, being unbiased, being able to have the ability to analyze a situation from an unbiased lens, and the evaluation of factual evidence, right? So training leaders and future leaders and managers in critical thinking skills can actually result in way more successful conflict resolution, and just training yourselves and training your young people who will then matriculate through these institutions, helping them understand and tap into those critical thinking skills is really important for them to be successful. So training individuals on conflict resolution techniques, that also involves, and most importantly, critical thinking skills, right? And these critical thinking skills will help to kind of circumvent a little bit any escalation that could happen in conflict, and also prevent additional issues from occurring. And so it also allows you to clarify goals and objectives of resolving the actual conflict clearly between individuals or between departments or wherever the conflict is at. And in turn, what it does, it sets a stage for a more effective resolution. And so it focuses on the problem that the conflict is kind of grounded in. It doesn't focus on the individual, because sometimes when we're dealing with conflict, we're so focused on the individual that we're not listening to or hearing the problem, right? And in conflict situations, emotionally driven people, and we know those emotional people, right? Some of us can admit, you can raise your hand if you're one of those emotional people. Emotionally driven people often tend to point out mistakes in the in their approaches and other people's approaches that's taken when they're dealing with conflict. Like, they're focusing only on the people. They're not dealing with the problem. And it's easy for them to do that because they can then not take responsibility and ownership. So really being able to tap into those critical thinking skills is key. Now, I'm gonna give you an example of why it's important in your home to allow young people to exercise critical thinking skills. How many of us, and you can kind of say yes or no in the chat, have been in situations when you were young and your parents say to you, stay out of grown folk business. Stay out of grown folk business. It's grown folk talking. Stay out of grown folks' business, right? I've had that said to me many a times, right? You know, and if you don't stay out of grown folks' business, ain't no telling what might happen, you know, but stay out of grown folks' business is usually the theme when you're in a space and there's a bunch of adults there and they're having a conversation and you're ear hustling. We call it ear hustling, right? And you can hear the conversation. And even as a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, 7-year-old, I can attest from my son, who was 5 at the time, they are really processing information. Right? Yes, children are seen or to be seen, not heard, but they're processing it. We're hearing this information and they're feeling empowered to jump in. And so I try to encourage our families to allow young people to engage in a dialogue, set boundaries with them, but allow them, because it does help them to sharpen their critical thinking skills. When we mute them from having these conversations, we potentially mute their ability to sharpen their saw when it comes down to thinking through situations. They can hear us when we're having conflict. You know, I remember having a conflict with someone, and my son was 6 years old, and I said something out of pocket, and my son said to me, "Mom, that was inappropriate." And I was like, ugh. The first response in my head was, stay out of grown folks' business. But I've received it and asked them, like, how did you analyze the situation? Like, where is this coming from? 5-year-old, 6-year-old? I think it was going on 6. And so there are some times where you absolutely don't want your children in that space, right? You want to separate them depending on what the conflict is. But there are times that you can use those conflicts or those conversations as teachable moments. So I encourage our families to allow young people to tap into those critical thinking skills. They can still be seen and not heard, but don't mute them, because this is their development, right? That first 5 years critical, right? And then we go into those formative years, 13. And if they haven't developed those necessary skills by the time they're 13, when they get into high school, they're going to really be struggling. So allow for them to tap into those skills early. And so I'm going to give you an example of a situation where my children were in a conflict. And so several years ago, my kids were sitting at a table arguing. I come in, I'm cooking, and I'm listening to the argument, ear hustling, because I want to hear what's going on. But they were talking about the Holocaust and slavery. And my daughter had she was keen and she was laser focused on the issue about the Holocaust and how she felt like it was the greatest tragedy the world has ever seen. And my son, who was counter, said, no, it's slavery. And they were spending all of this time debating. Now, my son, who's 4 years older than her, oftentimes like to pull at her and like to stress her out. And so he'll say things to really trigger her. And because she was still trying to figure out how to deal with her own critical thinking skills and how to manage through these conversations, sometimes she would storm away crying. And so she got up to go walk away crying. And I said, no, you come right back. Have a seat and let's talk about this. Start thinking through the situation. Don't worry about the person, right? Don't worry about him. Worry about the issue. And are you standing firm on your issue? And so those were one of the interesting milestones that I experienced with my children, really trying to tap into those critical thinking skills and struggling with it and finding themselves retreating when they felt the stress and the pressure of it all. So I encourage you, if you have young people, grandchildren, young people that you're mentoring, help them and put them in situations that will help them develop and strengthen their critical thinking skills. So why are they important? Why are they important? We know that just being able to analyze situations is just important, period, right? But critical thinking, it also allows us to look at conflict in a more objective way, when we can actually sit and think and process through. In any conflict resolution process, you have to actually be able to step back away from the conflict far enough so that you can see the whole picture. How many times have you had someone say, you know, you're too close to the situation, you're too close to the issue, you need to pull yourself out of it, or you're in bad relationships for such a long time and not realizing that you're in a bad relationship because you're in it, right? And it took you to come out of that relationship to kind of see the full scope of what everybody else was seeing. So in being objective, you have to be able to pull yourself back a little bit to kind of see the full scope of what's going on. When you exercise critical thinking by looking at the facts, right? Recognizing assumptions and evaluating alternative viewpoints, you are looking at the conflict as an outsider, right? From a different vantage point, as opposed to someone that's completely deep-seated in it. And that takes some skill to be able to pull yourself out of those situations, because we get so fired up and upset when there's a conflict happening. You know, you just want to, go in hard immediately. And so it takes a bit of a skill to be able to pull yourself back out of that conflict enough, or out of that situation enough, so that you can actually be more objective. It is said, and I quote, when you are a part of the problem, you can never be a part of the solution. So think about that. If I am deeply seated in the problem and then not able to pull myself out so I can see the whole scope of what's going on, I can't be a part of the solution, because I become more of the problem. So it allows you to clearly and firmly clarify what your goals are, your goals around resolving the conflict. And then in turn, it sets an amazing stage for effective resolution. So critical thinking also focuses, as I mentioned before, on the problem, not on the people, right? Because in conflict situations, emotionally driven people often tend to point out mistakes in the approaches of other people. My daughter was so focused on her brother just being mean and just rude, and he's always just so mean, that she wasn't able to focus on the issue that was at the table, right? And it took her outside of herself. And so critical thinking skills help you focus on the problem. It takes away the person that is causing the problem. And it also allows a leader to separate a problem from people and moderate the resolution process, where they're keeping the problem in perspective, right? Because sometimes you get so caught up that you're not focusing on the problem. You're getting so caught up on the fact that maybe, I don't even like him anyway. So now it's hard for you to be objective because you don't even like the person. And so we need to take the person out of the problem and focus on the problem. And then the type of critical thinking, or this particular type, it involves what's called metacognition, right? And metacognition is thinking about thinking. I'm thinking about thinking. How many times have you heard you ask somebody, what are you thinking about? And they say, I don't even know. I'm not thinking about anything, right? No, that's impossible. And sometimes it's just them thinking about thinking, just processing through what's happening, using your critical thinking skills. People tend to talk to themselves, talk them through, situations in the mirror to help them critically analyze what's going on. My son used to always say, Mom, it's okay that you talk to yourself, but I'm going to start looking side eye if you start responding to yourself, but sometimes you need to pause so that you can think and think through using your metacognition skills. And so it can actually transform the way people solve problems, right? Because you're turning on your higher thinking skills during the conflict, and then you're turning off your emotions. But if you don't know how to master that so that you can stay focused on the issue, your emotions will tend to take over. But if you can turn on your higher thinking skills, turn off your emotions, it will allow you to have more clearer decision-making skills. And then critical thinking means also better evaluation of arguments. So in a conflict situation, there will invariably be a lot of arguments where personal viewpoints and beliefs will be shared by everyone involved, right? And so critical thinkers actually entertain alternatives and the differing viewpoints without necessarily accepting them. So you can listen to other people's viewpoints, you can receive it, process it, but that not necessarily say that's my viewpoint or jump on the bandwagon. And sometimes we forget that just because you're receiving it and you're listening doesn't mean that you're accepting their viewpoint. You're just being a critical listener. You're analyzing the situation. And so this allows them to bring all of the thought process into play, all of the reasoning into play, put all of that on the table when you're trying to process through an issue. And then objective evaluation of these arguments against the overall goal of resolving improves the chances of an amazing solution to the problem, right? Being open, listening to other people's viewpoints, putting it all out on the table, your reasoning, you're challenging the issues, having the conversation respectfully really helps you get to a space where you can have a more favorable solution. And then the last thing is critical thinking brings the facts. We've been kind of inundated over the past 3 years with the alternative facts, right? Fake news, all of that stuff. When you're deep into your critical thinking, you're bringing the facts to the table. You're taking the person away from it. You're taking your emotions away from it. You're putting the facts on the table. And when we're faced with conflicts, critical thinkers always look for the facts. If you're really good at using your critical thinking skills, you're always looking for the facts. You're always looking for the data. What does this data say about it? What are the trends associated with the problem? Is this person constantly doing this thing, or is this something that just happened today? Because that's going to make a difference on how you resolve the issue. If you think that this is something that this person does all of the time, every freaking day this happens, every year, every month, every season this happens, that might change the way you manage this conflict. But if you can think about it and put the facts on the table, look at the trends, look at the data, and you realize, wait, he's never been this way, or she's never been this way. And it helps me now to process, because the facts integrated with a sound and solid evaluation of arguments provide a bit of a formidable base for resolving the conflict. So having an objective eye, Focusing on the problem, not the people. Points of view, making sure that you kind of engage the multiple points of view, and bringing the facts to the table are all of why critical thinking skills are amazingly important when you are trying to manage through conflict. And so conflict management, like what is this, right? So we talk about conflict management, we talk about conflict resolution. What exactly does it mean to manage conflict? So it's a way for two or more parties, two or more entities to find a peaceful solution to a disagreement among them. Now, you can be in a conflict all by yourself, right? You mad. How many of us have gone to a class reunion and your friend see someone across the room that they had a conflict with way back in high school, and they don't even want to sit? I mean, this is 20-year class reunion. You don't even want to sit in that space. I don't want to sit with her. That person had moved on. They ain't in this conflict with you. You in this thing by yourself, right? And because it was never addressed, they done moved on. They're not thinking about you, probably don't even remember you, don't remember the conflict happening. And so when we're talking about conflict, we're talking about multiple parties having a conflict. Not just one, because now this is an internal thing that you have to work out. But when there's two or more people playing, in parties in this, that is where the conflict happens. And then we want to find a peaceful solution to the disagreement among them. If you're sitting on the conflict and you're not engaging it, you'll never resolve it. And so you're just kind of holding on to this conflict, because sometimes people may not know that a conflict exists. They may have done something and never even knew that it was a problem, because the way you received it was different than the way they delivered it. And so it was important to address those issues right away. If you feel that there was something done against you, that it made you feel stressed, it made you feel unhappy, all of those things, address those issues or it will never be resolved. So the disagreement has to be, or has typically been, from a personal lens. It may have been from a financial lens. It could be, and we've been experiencing this over the past several years, from a financial, more of a political lens, and an emotional, period. And so when a dispute arises, often the best course of action is negotiation, right, to resolve the disagreement. So that's what conflict management is all about. So being able to manage and relieve stress in the moment is the key to staying balanced. It is the key to staying focused and in control. And it doesn't matter what challenges that you face, that if you're able to manage these conflict, you can balance it. You can remain in control at all times. And if you don't know how to stay centered and in control of yourself, you'll become overwhelmed. I mean, incredibly overwhelmed in the conflict situation and completely unable to respond in healthy ways, because the goal of conflict management is to be able to respond in a healthy way. Okay, so here are some response triggers that happens when conflict occurs. And I want to make sure that I'm respecting time and checking to see if anyone is sending me some messages. Let me see. All right. So here are some triggers that happens when conflict happens. Either you are going to put your foot on the gas, right? Run straight through that conflict, right? And that's from an angry or agitated, stress kind of response lens, right? We're putting the foot on we're going head first into this conflict, right? You're heated, you're keyed up, you're overly emotional and unable to sit still. That's one way that people tend to respond to conflict. Another one is the foot on the brake, right? So we have the foot on the gas, we're going hard in, we're fired up, or we're putting our foot on the brake. And that is a more of a withdrawn approach, right? A more depressed stress response. And you tend to shut down, right? You don't want to engage the conversation. Those are the people who walk away. don't want to resolve it, and it's not always a bad thing, because sometimes you have to walk away. Sometimes you got to get away from the situation. But those are the people who walk away, shut it down. What's negative is that you shut it down and you never revisit it. But walking away sometimes is a good thing. You gotta move so that it won't escalate into something that's even more crazy. And so this walking away, for most people, helps them to manage their emotion and manage their energy. And everyone has to deal with it in a different way. But staying in that space, staying in the brakes, holding the brakes, right? That's not always a good and healthy space to be in, because the conflict still exists. And then the third response is having your foot on the brake and the gas at the same time. Braking the gas at the same time, right? That's a very tense, kind of frozen stress response. Like you freeze under the pressure of it all and you can't do anything at all, right? You look completely paralyzed, but underneath the surface, you are extremely agitated. And that can cause a lot of health issues. And so we can talk about that in another segment, but that can cause a lot of health issues. And so either you're going to put your foot on the gas, all in it and through it. You're going to put your foot on the brake, right? And you're going to just walk away from it. You're going to withdraw from it, or you're going to have your foot on both the gas and the brake at the same time. And so you depending on who you are as an individual, will determine how you might approach it. Doesn't mean that all of these responses are bad, or it doesn't mean that they're all good. It's just that people respond differently. And we have to be cognizant of how people respond to these things, so that then we can use our critical thinking, how to move forward, instead of forcing them to deal with the conflict in the way that we feel like they should deal with it. And so when we're talking about the different styles of conflict management, we're talking about things like how do we, once we decide, okay, this is a conflict, and once we've engaged the other person that we're having a conflict with, that this exists, how then do we try to move forward so that it can be resolved? And so some people like the collaboration approach, right? That's the ideal approach. That's I win and you win. Everybody win. You get a car and you get a car and you get a car and you get a car. Everybody wins, right? And so the fundamental premise of I win, you win is that there's teamwork, there's cooperation, everyone's helping, each other achieve their goals, while also maintaining relationship, right? I hear what you say. I understand what you're saying, and you're absolutely right that this has happened. And you're absolutely right. If I had not done this, this would not have happened. And then the other party is like, and I understand that if this didn't happen, you wouldn't respond that way. And I forgive you and I understand, and let's move on. Collaboration, everybody wins, right? That's one approach. That's the ideal approach, right? The compromise is you bend, I bend. You bend and I bend. I ain't calling him until he called me. I am not calling him until he called me, right? That's winning something while losing a little, right? That's okay. Both ends are placed against the middle in an attempt to serve the common good, while ensuring that each person can maintain something of their original position, right? So when we have the you been, I been, this is where we get the conversation around, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. We're going to have to agree to disagree. That's the you been, I been approach. Does that work for conflict management? Not always, because the issue is still on the table, right? But this is an approach that most people would probably go to because it's the easiest. You know what? I'm just going to agree to disagree. And you're going to agree to disagree with me. Let's go on and have coffee. The other approach is the accommodation. I lose, you win. Right? Usually the person who's accommodating just don't want to break up the friendship. They just don't want to lose the friendship. You know, your girl crazy. You know your homeboy is out his mind. But I just don't want to lose a friendship, right? So working toward a common purpose is more important than any of that peripheral concerns, right? The trauma I love technology, but sometimes technology don't love me back. So I'm back. I'm so glad that you guys stayed around to wait for me to filter through this technology issue. But I am back, and so we're talking about different styles of dealing with conflict management, and we talked about the whole collaboration approach, the compromise approach. We talked about accommodation approach, and like I said, accommodation is really about us trying to preserve relationships, right? And really thinking about the trauma of confronting the differences and how it could damage fragile relationships. And, often the person who chooses this approach just want to appease others, right? By downplaying the conflict. And this actually, in their head, is protecting the relationship. And in actuality, it really impacts the relationship negatively because we're not being honest and authentic with one another. So that's the accommodation approach. The competition approach is I win and you lose, right? I win, you lose, no matter what. I'm going to win, you're going to lose. And the premise around that associates itself with the whole winning ideal. A conflict is about competition, right? Who's the stronger? Who's the louder? And with the earlier example that I showed with my son and my daughter, he was about winning. He didn't really care about the issue. He was just trying to wear her out. How can I wear her out? I want to win. And Dominique, her focus was, I need to get the facts out here. I need to get the information out here, right? And so competition, when winning is the most important thing, I'm going to wear you down until you just decide to retreat and throw the white flag out. And then the avoidance is the last one, right? There's no winners, no losers. No winners are at all, no losers. And this is, it's not the right, approach, but a lot of people do this because it's easier for them just to kind of completely remove themselves. Don't ever talk about it again. Never bring it up over Thanksgiving until it manifests itself in some other way, in some other situation, in some other relationship. So it's just not the right time or the right place to address it, right? So avoidance at that moment, but not avoidance where you're never going to deal with it. Because some people need to just avoid it right now because we're out in public, we're in the airport, we're around a whole lot of people. We at the grocery store, kind of like, your mom is like, you acting up right now. But when we get home, and so the avoidance may be necessary so that you can immediately address the concerns without anyone feeling any pain or any hurt. Okay. So this is where we get to my favorite parts. If you can see this, I don't know if you can see this. Can you see my next screen? Okay, yes, absolutely. Thank you. So this is where we get to our favorite part. When I was doing my leadership development program for young people, one of the things that I wanted to do is introduce them to these I statements, right? And the I statements is really important for individuals when they are trying to calm down and become stress-free in that space. And I would have these signs up on the walls in my in my office, and I would also have them at home in my kitchen. And so these are statements that really give you an opportunity to express what's going on. And so when you're using these I feel statements, what it is basically a sheet of paper. On the back side of it, it gives instructions for the receiver, right? So as a sender of the message, your job is to share what's going on with you at that moment. I feel disrespected when you say the things that you say, and I want to have a conversation about it so that we can come to a solution of how best to communicate with me, right? And at the same time, while you're having these statements, you have your little sheet in front of you. I always encourage my young people to do this, even some of my adult staff. On the other side of the sheet, it gives you the instructions to take a deep breath, listen with your eyes and your body completely. Don't try to create a response in your head, because then that means you're not listening to what's being said. And so helps people to kind of come down from that stressful thing that they're feeling when they're first faced with conflict, right? So these are I feel statements. I feel, fill in a blank. When you, fill in a blank. And I want, fill in a blank. Do this for 5 different things. It could be 5 or 6 different things that's going on between you and this particular conflict that you're having. And this helps you to decompress. It helps you to focus the facts and the information. And it helps you to take the problem and bring it to the table and not focus on the person in particular. And then the other one, in the next slide, we talk about how the individual could respond to it, right? So the person who's receiving the message could then go back and say, after listening to everything that they need to hear from that individual, they can then go back and fill in their blanks. You sound like this. You sound hurt. You sound frustrated because I have been inconsiderate of your feelings. And the next time I will listen with my eyes and my body, and I will give you the respect that you deserve. And at the same time, on the other side of their sheet, the person who's receiving the message sees, take a deep breath, listen with your eyes and your body. Don't form a response in your head, because then that means you're not listening. And so these are some techniques that I use not only with my students, but is also things that I use with my children to help them think through what's next and how to engage in the conversation and bring their full self to the conversation and take the emotion out and also take the person out. So now we're going to close this thing out, right? We're going to close this thing out. And so if you could just move to the last slide. And thank you so much for doing this for me. Technology was being so rude to me today. This is what I want to leave you with. We cannot solve problems with the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So it's really important to tap into your skills of critical thinking. It's really important for you to then hone into those conflict management skills and take your time, because we're talking about people's emotions, and those are real, even if they don't seem real to you. And even if it seems misplaced to you, they're real to the individual that are expressing the concerns to you. And so people always ask me, well, how do you know when you should resolve a conflict? How do you know? Like, how do you know if you should even bother with it? How do you know if you should just not block that person, or, stop following them on Twitter, or whatever that thing is? And here are some things that I want you to walk away with. At the end of the day, deciding to resolve conflict is really about asking yourself these 4 questions. What is the importance of the individual you are having a conflict with? Who are they to you? How important are they to you? Right? That's the first question you want to ask yourself when you're deciding if you should even bother with trying to resolve this conflict. The other one is, what is the consequence of resolving the conflict? Because there are consequences to resolving the conflict. How many times have you been in a relationship with someone and they've just been horrible to you, right? You've been in the relationship with them for 5, 6, 7 years, horrible to you. You're sharing this information with your family. Now they don't like this person, so he's an enemy of the state, or she's an enemy of the state. Don't want her to come to the family reunions. Don't want her to come to the Easter brunches. Don't want her involved in anything, right? And then all of a sudden, you guys resolve your conflict. Whatever that conflict is that was causing this person to be so horrible to you, you resolve that conflict, but the rest of the family have not. They still don't want this person coming to the picnic. They still don't want them coming to the Easter party, right? So there is consequences, good or bad, to resolving a conflict. So what are the consequences of the resolving it? And what is the consequence of not resolving it, good or bad? And the final question is, are you willing to deal with the consequences, no matter what it is, good or bad? Are you willing to deal with the consequences? So who is this individual to you? How important are they to you? What is the consequences of resolving the issue? What is the consequence of not resolving it? And are you willing to deal with the consequence? Those are some questions that I want you to think about when you're approached with another conflict. And trying to decide, is it worth it? Is it worth investing the energy and the stress into managing through this situation? And so that is my conversation with you. I wish I had more time with you, and I wish my technology wasn't acting crazy. But I am so grateful that you invited me into this space. If you have additional questions for me that you weren't able to ask today, and if the people who's watching the recording have some additional questions, please feel free to email me at Danielle@embracingarms.com. I would love to hear from you. And if you just want to hear some additional messages that I share on some of my social media platform, you can visit me on YouTube at #YourBestLife, URBEST. LYFE. I share 5-minute quickies, so 5-6-minute messages about random things. So come join me in that space also. But I'm so honored to be in this space with you. And I hope that you walked away with something. And as you are walking away with this information, remember, information remains information until you share it. That's the only time it becomes knowledge. So share the information and transmit it into some knowledge. So thank you again. Dope ladies.